The lake was calm the morning it all began, but calm waters often hide the deepest storms. Nestled in the mountains of Blue Ridge, North Carolina, the old coal lake shimmered under the rising sun, a body of water as old as the dam that held it in place. For decades, the Cole family had guarded that dam, a structure built by Ethan's grandfather with stone, steel, and sweat. It wasn't just concrete and machinery. It was legacy, a living monument to a man who had carved a home out of wilderness and given it to his family. The lake fed wildlife, supported families, and at its heart lay a bridge of gray stone, arched with elegant curves, connecting Ethan's property to the world beyond. The bridge wasn't just practical. It was history. Ethan's grandfather had crafted it by hand, each stone carefully chosen, a passage that had endured storms, floods, and decades of traffic. It carried generations across the water, and to Ethan, it symbolized endurance. But to the HOA, it was an obstacle, an inconvenience standing in the way of their grand vision. For years, the Homeowners Association had been tightening its grip on the community, led by Karen Whitmore, a woman whose iron will was matched only by her ambition. She was relentless, polished in her pearl necklaces and sharp suits, her words as cutting as her eyes. She envisioned Coal Lake not as a sanctuary, but as profit, a jewel polished, into a resort paradise that would draw outsiders and dollars. To her, the bridge was outdated, unsafe, a relic that blocked heavy equipment and tour buses from moving freely. And when obstacles stood in Karen's way, they never stood for long. Ethan had resisted her demands, standing firm in meetings, producing documents, proving ownership of both the bridge and the dam. He thought history and legality would protect him. He thought reason might temper greed, but greed has no patience for legacy. And one morning, as Ethan stood on his porch overlooking the water, the roar of heavy machinery shattered the peace. A crane and demolition crew had moved onto the bridge, their yellow hulks reflected in the still blue water. Workers in helmets and vests marched like soldiers under Karen's command. Ethan rushed down the hillside, his voice lost beneath the grind of engines and the smash of stone. The bridge shuddered as steel cables pulled, cracking under pressure. Centuries of craftsmanship undone in a single morning. And standing at the far side of the bridge, clutching a radio in her manicured hand, Karen watched with satisfaction as history fell into ruin. Chunks of stone tumbled into the water, ripples spreading like veins of anger across the lake. Ethan's fists clenched as he stared across the broken span, the woman in white smirking from the other side. The bridge, his grandfather's bridge, was gone. But what Karen didn't know, what she could never have imagined, was that the bridge was not Ethan's only inheritance. Hidden deep beneath the surface of the lake, buried behind steel gates and floodgates of concrete, was a power greater than any bridge. Ethan controlled the dam. He controlled the very heart of the lake, the valves that determined whether the waters flowed or dried. And in that moment, watching the ruin of his heritage sink into the water, Ethan made a silent vow. If they thought they could destroy his legacy, he would show them what true destruction looked like. The weeks that followed were tense. Karen and her allies moved quickly, celebrating their triumph, telling residents the bridge had been unsafe, claiming Ethan had resisted progress. She paraded developers through the area, showing off the resort she and her partner, Mark Jennings, had been building. A sprawling luxury lodge stood at the northern tip of the lake, its balconies stretching over the water, boat docks glistening with polished wood, ready for tourists and investors. They poured millions into it, confident the lake would serve them for decades to come. But the community whispered. Some pitied Ethan, others feared him. They saw him working late into the night near the dam, tools in hand, eyes burning with something unspoken. They saw him hauling files, maps, and old blueprints from his grandfather's study. Rumors spread like wildfire. Ethan had a plan. Ethan wasn't finished. Ethan was waiting. Karen, of course, dismissed it. In her mind, the Cole family was beaten. The bridge was gone. The HOA's control was unchallenged. And yet sometimes when she drove past the lake, she noticed the way Ethan looked at the water, calm, patient, like a man watching the clock tick toward something inevitable. By midsummer, the resort was preparing its grand opening. Invitations were sent, investors lined up, and the HOA boasted of the economic boom about to come. The lake was the centerpiece, the crown jewel. Without it, the resort was nothing more than a shell of wood and stone. But Karen never considered the possibility that anyone could take the lake away. Ethan remembered his grandfather's words. The lake doesn't belong to anyone. It lives or dies by the dam, and the dam belongs to us. Every evening, he stood on the old platform at the dam, staring at the control wheels, the steel locks, the floodgates waiting in silence. It would be so easy, he thought. A single turn, a single decision, and the water that had taken a lifetime to gather could vanish in days. He didn't want to, but they had forced his hand. The final push came on a sweltering August afternoon. Ethan had gone into town for supplies when he overheard Karen bragging at the cafe. She told her, friends, the lake would never again belong to the Coles. She laughed about the bridge, calling it a pile of rocks that needed to sink. And then she said it, the words that burned into Ethan's mind. Ethan's nothing. He doesn't have the guts to stand up to me. That night, as the resort glowed with lights in the distance, as music drifted across the lake from their soft opening event, Ethan unlocked the gate to the dam. The moon hung above the water like an omen. He placed his hands on the great steel wheel, felt the cold bite of iron against his palms, and began to turn. The floodgates groaned, metal screeching against metal, until finally the first surge of water roared into the spillway. The sound was deafening, like thunder tearing through stone. At first, nothing seemed different. The lake still mirrored the stars. The resort still glimmered. But hour by hour, the water began to lower. The shoreline crept outward, docks sagged, boats tilted in the mud. The lake, once eternal, was slipping away. By dawn, whispers had spread. Residents woke to find the water lower than they'd ever seen it. Fish flopped in shallow pools, docks hung in the air, and the resort's prize marina lay stranded. Karen stormed to the HOA office, demanding answers. But the engineers she called told her the truth. Someone had opened the dam. And there was only one man with the keys. The next morning, Ethan stood on his porch, coffee in hand, watching the chaos unfold. Neighbors shouted, developers scrambled, and Karen, in her white suit, barked orders at anyone who would listen. The lake was dropping faster than they could comprehend. Every inch gone was $1 burned. Every foot lost was $1 million evaporated from the resort's value. But Ethan remained silent. He had given them a chance. They destroyed his bridge, his family's legacy. Now, he was destroying theirs. And this was only the beginning. The lake was dying. Day by day, the waters that had once sparkled under the North Carolina sun slipped away, retreating into the mud like a ghost abandoning its home. What had been a proud expanse of blue became a scar across the land, a basin of cracked earth and stranded boats. The fish had fled downstream. The birds circled confused, and the once proud resort that had gleamed on the shoreline was reduced to a building staring out over emptiness. The HOA was in panic. Karen's phone rang without pause, investors demanding answers. Residents furious, developers threatening lawsuits. She tried to soothe them, claiming it was temporary, a technical glitch, an accident of weather. But there was no rain to blame. There was no storm to point to. The truth gnawed at her even as she denied it. Someone had opened the dam, and there was only one man who had the key, Ethan Cole. She confronted him in front of the neighborhood one hot afternoon, marching up the path to his cabin with her entourage of HOA board members. Cameras rolled, residents whispered, and Karen's voice, sharp as glass, accused him of sabotage. But Ethan never raised his tone. He stood calm, hands steady, eyes colder than the lake bed that stretched further into view behind him. He reminded her, in the quiet voice of a man certain of his ground, that the dam had always belonged to his family, that the deeds, the maps, the history were clear, that she had demolished what was his, so he had simply chosen to use what was his. Karen seethed, but she could not argue the law. For decades, the Cole family had maintained the dam, and the HOA had never challenged it, until now when it was too late. The resort's grand opening was canceled. Millions had already been sunk into the project. Luxury suites, boat docks, manicured lawns, pools overlooking the lake. But without water, it was all meaningless. Investors pulled out, their money vanishing as quickly as the lake itself. Mark Jennings, Karen's business partner, screamed about bankruptcy, threatening to sue, threatening to take Karen down with him. The HOA meetings turned hostile. Residents who had once cheered Karen now shouted her down, blaming her arrogance for provoking Ethan. The very community she had ruled like a queen was crumbling beneath her. But Ethan didn't watch their meetings. He didn't revel in the chaos, not openly. Each evening he returned to the dam, listening to the roar of water rushing downstream, watching the level drop lower and lower. It was vengeance, yes, but it was also justice. The bridge they destroyed had stood for generations. Now their resort, their $4 million pride, would be gone before its doors had ever opened. Word spread beyond the community. Local news crews arrived, cameras capturing the dramatic decline of Coal Lake. Headlines screamed of scandal, sabotage, power struggles between a stubborn homeowner and a ruthless. HOA reporters tried to corner Ethan, but he refused interviews. He didn't need to explain himself. The empty lake was explanation enough. By the third week, the resort was a ruin. Docks sat on dry, cracked earth. The once luxurious shoreline stank of rotting fish and algae. The building itself, designed to overlook shining waters, now looked out onto a wasteland. Investors fled entirely. Lawsuits piled up, and Karen, once untouchable, faced financial ruin. But she wasn't finished. Not yet. One night, long after the sun had set and the cicadas had begun their endless chorus, Karen arrived at the dam herself. She wore no pearls, no pressed suit, only a jacket thrown over trembling shoulders. Her face, illuminated by the glow of a flashlight, was pale with desperation. She shouted Ethan's name into the darkness, her voice cracking against the stone. She demanded he stop, that he close the gates, that he think of the community, the property values, the lives affected. She begged, and for the first time in years, her arrogance faltered. Ethan stepped from the shadows, silent, calm, like the keeper of an ancient secret. He told her the truth she had ignored from the beginning, that she had crossed a line when she destroyed his bridge, that some things cannot be bought, cannot be controlled by committees and votes. That legacy and respect meant more than profit. And with that he turned away, leaving her to scream into the night as the waters continued to drain. By the end of summer, Coal Lake was gone. Where once a vast expanse of water had stretched for miles, there was only dust and silence. The resort stood like a skeleton, empty, abandoned, its million-dollar windows staring at a graveyard of earth. The HOA was bankrupt. Karen was disgraced, forced to resign in shame. Residents whispered her name like a curse, the woman who lost them everything. And Ethan? He rebuilt. Not the resort, not the community, but his bridge. Stone by stone, he returned to the task his grandfather had once completed. Neighbors who had once doubted him came to help, carrying rocks, mixing mortar, lending hands. Slowly, the arch rose again over the dry basin, a monument to endurance, to defiance, to legacy. It was not as grand as before, not yet, but it stood. He never refilled the lake. The dam remained open, the valley dry. Without water, there was no resort, no profit, no HOA ambitions. Only the land quiet and free. Ethan had turned their jewel into dust, and in that dust he found peace. The story spread far beyond Blue Ridge. Some called him ruthless, others called him a hero. But Ethan didn't care what they called him. He knew what he had done. He had avenged his family, protected his legacy, and taught a lesson that Karen, and anyone like her, would never forget. They destroyed his bridge, he destroyed their empire. And as the sun set one last time over the empty basin of Coal Lake, the arch of the new bridge cast its shadow long across the earth, a silent reminder that some legacies cannot be demolished, no matter how hard they try.